The morning sun cast long shadows across the rugged Arizona territory, as Sarah Mitchell carefully tended to her small garden behind the modest wooden cabin she called home. Her weathered hands worked the dry soil with practiced determination, coaxing life from the unforgiving desert earth. At 28, Sarah had already endured more hardship than most women twice her age. The death of her husband Thomas 3 years prior had left her alone on their remote homestead, miles from the nearest settlement of Prescott. Sarah had arrived in Arizona territory 5 years ago as a newlywed, filled with dreams of building a prosperous ranch alongside her beloved Thomas. Those dreams had crumbled when Apache raiders struck their nearest neighbors, the Hendersons, killing the entire family except for young Mary Henderson, who had hidden in the root cellar for 2 days before Sarah found her. The traumatic event had awakened something deep within Sarah, a calling to heal rather than harbor hatred. Against the advice of every settler in the territory, Sarah had begun treating wounded travelers regardless of their background. Her cabin had become an unofficial medical station, where she used the healing knowledge passed down from her grandmother, combined with techniques learned from a traveling doctor who had stayed with them one winter. She had even treated friendly Apache scouts who came through the area, learning bits of their language and earning their grudging respect. The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted her morning routine. Sarah straightened, shading her eyes against the brilliant desert sun. A lone rider approached slowly, slumped forward in his saddle. Even from a distance, she could see the dark stains on his clothing that could only be blood. Her heart raced as she recognized the distinctive clothing and long black hair of an Apache warrior. As the horse drew closer, Sarah could see the rider was barely conscious, his bronze skin pale beneath a sheen of perspiration. Multiple bullet wounds marked his chest and shoulder, and a deep gash across his forehead had dried blood caked in his hair. His horse, equally exhausted, came to a stop near her garden fence as if it somehow knew this was a place of healing. The warrior began to slide from his mount, and Sarah rushed forward without hesitation. Despite his injuries, he was a large man, heavily muscled from years of desert warfare. She caught him as best she could, his weight nearly bringing her to the ground. His dark eyes opened briefly, meeting hers with a mixture of pain and wariness. In broken English, he whispered something she couldn't quite understand before losing consciousness entirely. Sarah knew she faced a terrible decision. Helping this man could bring the wrath of the territorial militia down upon her, as tensions between settlers and Apache tribes had reached a deadly crescendo in recent months. Colonel Morrison, the territorial commander, had issued orders for all Apache warriors to be shot on sight. If anyone discovered she was harboring an injured Apache, she could be arrested as a traitor or worse. But looking down at the unconscious warrior, Sarah saw not an enemy but a human being in desperate need of medical attention. His breathing was shallow and labored, and she estimated he had lost a dangerous amount of blood. Without immediate treatment, he would certainly die within hours. The same hands that had once helped deliver babies and set broken bones for her fellow settlers now worked to drag this wounded Apache warrior toward her cabin. The effort nearly exhausted her, but she managed to get him inside and onto the sturdy wooden table Thomas had built for her medical work. She quickly gathered her supplies: clean cloth, needle and thread, bottles of whiskey for disinfectant, and various herbs she had learned to use for pain and infection. The warrior's wounds were severe but not immediately fatal if properly treated. As Sarah began cleaning the bullet wounds, she wondered about this man's story. The scars covering his body told of many battles, but there was something about his face in repose that suggested depth beyond that of a simple warrior. His hands, though calloused from weapon use, showed the careful attention of someone who worked with precision and care. Working through the morning and into the afternoon, Sarah removed 2 bullets and stitched multiple wounds. The warrior drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes muttering in Apache, other times trying to sit up before the pain forced him back down. During his lucid moments, his eyes tracked her movements with intelligent awareness, as if trying to understand why this white woman was risking everything to save his life. By evening, Sarah had done everything medically possible. The warrior's fever had broken, and his breathing had become more regular. She prepared a bed for him in the small room Thomas had used as his study, knowing that moving him outside in his condition would likely prove fatal. As she covered him with one of her few remaining good blankets, Sarah realized she had crossed a line from which there might be no return. That night, as she sat by candlelight keeping watch over her unexpected patient, Sarah reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. Just that morning, her biggest concern had been whether her vegetable garden would produce enough food for the coming winter. Now she found herself the sole caretaker of an Apache warrior, whose very presence in her home could cost her everything she had left in this unforgiving frontier world. 3 days passed before the Apache warrior fully regained consciousness. Sarah had maintained a careful vigil, changing his bandages, forcing small amounts of broth between his lips, and monitoring his fever. On the morning of the 4th day, she entered the small room to find him sitting up, his dark eyes alert and focused entirely on her. The warrior's name, she learned through careful conversation mixing English, Spanish, and hand gestures, was Ayanna, which meant eternal blossom in his language. The irony was not lost on Sarah that this fierce fighter bore such a peaceful name. Ayanna explained haltingly that he was not merely a warrior, but served as a healer among his people, trained in the traditional medicine ways of his grandmother. This revelation explained the intelligence she had sensed in his eyes and the careful way he examined her medical supplies. As Ayanna's strength returned, so did his wariness. He questioned Sarah repeatedly about her motivations, unable to comprehend why a white woman would risk everything to save an Apache life. The distrust ran both ways. Sarah had heard countless stories of Apache raids, of families murdered in their sleep, of children taken never to be seen again. Yet sitting across from this man, watching him carefully tend to an injured sparrow he had found outside her window, she struggled to reconcile the savage reputation with the gentle reality before her. Their communication improved daily as Ayanna's English vocabulary expanded and Sarah picked up basic Apache phrases. She learned that he had been wounded during a skirmish with territorial militia, who had attacked his hunting party without provocation. 3 of his companions had been killed and he had barely escaped with his life. The bullets in his body had come from soldiers who shot first and asked questions never. Ayanna shared stories of his people that contradicted everything Sarah had been told about Apache culture. He spoke of a proud nation struggling to protect their ancestral lands, of children who played the same games as white children, of mothers who sang lullabies under the same desert stars. He described the complex spiritual beliefs of his people, their deep connection to the land, and their sophisticated understanding of desert survival that had sustained them for generations. In return, Sarah found herself opening up about her own losses and struggles. She told Ayanna about Thomas, about the loneliness of frontier life, about her determination to build something meaningful from the ashes of her shattered dreams. She explained her calling to heal, describing how she had learned to set bones from watching her grandfather, how she had delivered babies for neighbor women, how she had saved the life of a cavalry sergeant who had been shot by bandits. As the days stretched into a week, an unlikely friendship began to develop between the frontier woman and the Apache healer. Ayanna shared his knowledge of desert plants and their medicinal properties, teaching Sarah which cacti could treat infection and which roots could ease pain. Sarah showed him her collection of medical instruments and explained techniques she had learned from books and experience. The growing bond between them was tested when riders approached the cabin late one afternoon. Sarah quickly helped Ayanna into the hidden root cellar beneath her kitchen floor, covering the entrance with a heavy rug and table. 3 territorial militiamen dismounted outside, their uniforms dusty from hard riding and their faces grim with purpose. Captain Williams, a weathered man in his 40s, knocked roughly on Sarah's door. When she answered, his piercing blue eyes scanned her face and clothing for any sign of deception. The militiamen had been tracking wounded Apache raiders, he explained, and blood trails had led them near her property. Had she seen anything suspicious in recent days? Sarah's heart pounded as she met the captain's gaze steadily. Her medical training had taught her to remain calm under pressure, and she drew upon that experience now. She mentioned treating a wounded traveler several days ago, describing a fictional white prospector who had been attacked by bandits. The story was plausible enough that the militiamen seemed to accept it, though Captain Williams continued to study her with obvious suspicion. After the soldiers departed, Sarah helped Ayanna emerge from his hiding place. The close call had shaken them both, making clear the enormous risks they were taking. Ayanna insisted he was strong enough to leave, unwilling to put Sarah in further danger. But Sarah could see he was still far from fully healed, and traveling across the desert in his condition would likely prove fatal. That evening, as they sat by candlelight discussing his departure, Sarah made a decision that surprised even herself. She offered to help Ayanna reach his people safely, proposing to guide him partway through territory she knew well from her travels with Thomas. It was a dangerous proposition that could cost her life, but something deeper than mere compassion was driving her actions. Ayanna studied Sarah's face in the flickering candlelight, searching for signs of deception or ulterior motive. Finding none, he felt something shift within his own heart. This white woman had already risked everything to save his life. Now she was offering to risk even more to ensure his safe return home. No one in his experience, Apache or white, had ever shown such selfless courage on behalf of someone they barely knew. As they planned his departure for the following evening, both Sarah and Ayanna sensed that their brief time together had changed them in ways they were only beginning to understand. The barriers of race and culture that had seemed insurmountable just days earlier were beginning to crumble, replaced by something neither had expected to find in the other's company. A profound recognition of shared humanity that transcended the bitter conflicts raging across the territory. The journey began under cover of darkness, with Sarah leading a pack mule loaded with medical supplies and provisions, while Ayanna rode his recovered horse. They traveled north through terrain Sarah knew from supply runs to Prescott, following deer trails and hidden canyons that would keep them away from main roads and military patrols. The desert night was alive with sounds: owls calling from hidden perches, coyotes singing in the distance, and the whisper of wind through ancient rock formations. Ayanna marveled at Sarah's knowledge of the land. She moved through the darkness with confidence, reading stars and landmarks with skills that rivaled those of his own people. When he commented on this, Sarah explained that Thomas had been part mountain man, part rancher, and had taught her to navigate by natural signs rather than relying on maps or marked trails. She had spent countless hours riding beside him, learning to read the subtle language of the desert. As dawn approached, they made camp in a sheltered canyon, where a small spring provided fresh water and cottonwood trees offered concealment. While Sarah prepared a simple breakfast over a carefully hidden fire, Ayanna demonstrated Apache techniques for erasing their trail and concealing signs of their passage. The cooperation between them had become natural, each contributing skills learned from their vastly different backgrounds. During the day's rest, their conversations deepened beyond the practical matters of survival. Ayanna spoke of his childhood, describing how his grandmother had recognized his gift for healing when he was barely old enough to walk. She had taught him not only the medicinal properties of plants, but also the spiritual aspects of healing, the importance of treating the whole person, body and soul together. His path as a healer had set him apart from other young warriors, earning him respect but also a certain isolation. Sarah found herself sharing memories she had never spoken aloud, even to Thomas. She described growing up as the daughter of a circuit-riding preacher in Missouri, how she had learned compassion from watching her father tend to the spiritual wounds of frontier families. Her medical knowledge had begun with helping her mother care for sick parishioners, but had expanded dramatically after witnessing the inadequate medical care available on the frontier. The second night brought unexpected danger when they encountered a small band of white outlaws camped near a water source Sarah had planned to use. These men were clearly not honest travelers. Their conversation, overheard from a safe distance, revealed plans to raid isolated homesteads and blame the attacks on Apache raiders. Ayanna's warrior instincts immediately suggested eliminating the threat, but Sarah proposed a different approach. Working together, they used Ayanna's tracking skills and Sarah's knowledge of the area to lead the outlaws' horses away during the night, stranding them far from any settlement. The bandits would face a long, dangerous walk through Apache territory, carrying only what they could manage on foot. It was a solution that neutralized the threat without bloodshed, demonstrating to both Sarah and Ayanna how their different approaches to problems could complement each other. As they continued north on the third day, they began encountering signs of Ayanna's people: carefully arranged stones that served as trail markers, thin columns of smoke from distant camps, and the occasional distant horsemen who appeared briefly on ridgelines before vanishing again. Ayanna explained that they were being watched and evaluated, that his people needed to determine whether Sarah posed a threat or could be trusted. The scrutiny made Sarah nervous, but Ayanna assured her that his status as a healer would provide protection. Apache law prohibited harming those who came in peace to provide medical aid, a tradition that had occasionally protected white doctors and missionaries in the past. Still, Sarah was acutely aware that she was now deeper in Apache territory than any white woman had ever traveled and lived to tell about it. Late on the third afternoon, they were surrounded by a dozen Apache warriors who seemed to materialize from the rocks and brush around them. The leader, a stern-faced man with intricate tattoos covering his arms, spoke rapidly to Ayanna in their native language. Sarah watched anxiously as the conversation grew heated, with several warriors pointing at her and making gestures that clearly expressed hostility. Ayanna's responses were firm and respectful, but Sarah could see the tension in his posture. Finally, the leader approached her directly, studying her with eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. In broken English, he asked why she had risked everything to save an Apache life. Sarah's answer was simple and direct. She was a healer, and healing recognized no boundaries of race or tribe. The Apache leader continued his interrogation, asking about her medical knowledge and her intentions. Sarah demonstrated her skills by examining a young warrior who had recently injured his shoulder, correctly diagnosing the problem and suggesting a treatment that impressed even the tribal healer present. Her respectful manner and obvious competence gradually shifted the mood of the group from suspicion to cautious acceptance. As evening approached, the warriors escorted Sarah and Ayanna to a hidden camp where several families were gathered. Sarah found herself the center of intense curiosity, with Apache women and children venturing close to examine this strange white woman who had traveled so far into their territory. Despite the language barrier, she began to recognize universal human expressions: the concern of mothers for sick children, the gratitude of those she was able to help with minor medical problems, the natural curiosity of children who had never seen someone with her coloring. That night, sitting around a central fire while Apache families shared their evening meal, Sarah experienced something she had never expected. Despite being the only white person for hundreds of miles, despite the cultural barriers and recent conflicts, she felt a sense of belonging she had rarely experienced even in white settlements. These people, so demonized by territorial authorities, were simply families trying to survive in an increasingly hostile world. Sarah's intended brief visit to return Ayanna safely to his people stretched into weeks as she found herself drawn into the daily life of the Apache band. Her medical skills were desperately needed. Several children suffered from a respiratory illness that the tribal healer was struggling to treat, and an elderly man had developed a painful condition in his joints that limited his mobility. Working alongside the tribal medicine woman, a dignified elder named Nasha, Sarah learned traditional Apache healing methods while sharing her own knowledge. The collaboration between Sarah and Nasha proved remarkable. Where Sarah's techniques focused on treating symptoms and preventing infection, Nasha's approach addressed the spiritual and emotional aspects of illness. Together, they developed treatments that were more effective than either could achieve alone. The respiratory illness that had threatened several children responded well to a combination of Sarah's steam treatments and Nasha's herbal remedies, while the elderly man's joint pain improved dramatically when Sarah's massage techniques were combined with Nasha's sacred ceremonies. Ayanna served as translator and cultural bridge during these healing sessions, but Sarah noticed he was struggling with his own internal conflicts. His position as a healer among his people had always set him apart from the warriors, but his growing feelings for Sarah created additional complications. Apache society had strict customs regarding relationships, and his interest in a white woman challenged tribal traditions in ways that made many tribal members uncomfortable. The situation became more complex when scouts brought news that territorial militias were actively searching for Sarah. Captain Williams had discovered inconsistencies in her story about the wounded prospector and suspected she had aided Apache raiders. A substantial reward had been posted for information leading to her capture, and several bounty hunters were known to be tracking through the area. Sarah's presence in the Apache camp was endangering everyone. Chief Cochise, the respected leader of this Apache band, called a council meeting to address the growing crisis. Sarah was invited to speak for herself, with Ayanna translating her words. She explained her situation honestly, acknowledging that her presence put the tribe at risk but expressing her commitment to helping their sick and injured. Several younger warriors argued for sending her away immediately, while others suggested she might be valuable as a hostage for future negotiations with territorial authorities. Nasha surprised everyone by speaking passionately in Sarah's defense. The elderly medicine woman had never before supported any white person, but she testified that Sarah's healing gifts were genuine and desperately needed. She proposed that Sarah be adopted into the tribe according to ancient customs, which would provide her with protection under Apache law while allowing her to continue her healing work. The adoption ceremony took place 3 days later, with Sarah participating in traditional rituals that connected her spiritually to Apache culture. She received an Apache name, Shimasani, meaning grandmother, in recognition of her healing wisdom despite her relatively young age. The ceremony was emotional for Sarah, who had been essentially alone in the world since Thomas's death, but it also created new complications in her relationship with Ayanna. As an adopted member of the tribe, Sarah was now subject to Apache marriage customs and social expectations. Several tribal members began suggesting potential husbands for her, traditional arrangements that would strengthen her position within the community. These well-meaning efforts created awkward situations for both Sarah and Ayanna, who found themselves unable to openly acknowledge their growing attraction, while others planned Sarah's future without consulting her feelings. The tension came to a head when a respected warrior named Geronimo formally requested permission to court Sarah. Geronimo was everything an Apache woman was, supposed to want, brave in battle, skilled as a hunter, and from a family with strong standing in the tribe. His interest in Sarah was genuine, and he had gone to considerable effort to learn basic English phrases to communicate with her directly. Sarah found herself in an impossible position. Rejecting Geronimo's suit would insult not only him, but his family and supporters within the tribe. Yet accepting would mean abandoning any possibility of exploring her feelings for Ayanna, who had remained silent about the courtship despite his obvious distress. The situation was complicated further by Sarah's uncertainty about her own desires. Did she truly care for Ayanna, or was she simply grateful for his kindness during her most vulnerable moments? The resolution came from an unexpected source when Nasha approached Sarah privately with ancient tribal wisdom. The elderly medicine woman had observed the growing connection between Sarah and Ayanna, recognizing something deeper than mere attraction. According to Apache tradition, healers were permitted to choose their own partners based on spiritual compatibility rather than social convenience, a privilege that extended to Sarah through her adoption and recognition as a medicine woman. Armed with this knowledge, Sarah requested a private meeting with Chief Cochise to discuss her future. She explained her feelings honestly, acknowledging her respect for Geronimo while making clear that her heart belonged elsewhere. The chief was initially skeptical. Marriages between Apache men and white women were virtually unknown and would create additional tensions with territorial authorities. However, Nasha's support and the obvious benefits of keeping Sarah within the tribe as a healer influenced his decision. When Ayanna learned of Sarah's declaration, his own internal struggles intensified. His feelings for her had grown stronger each day, but he understood the enormous challenges they would face as a couple. Their union would be controversial within Apache society and would make both of them permanent targets of territorial militias. Yet when he looked at Sarah, working tirelessly to heal his people and adapting to their ways with genuine respect, he knew he could not imagine a future without her. The decision was ultimately made when Apache scouts brought word that a large military force was approaching their territory, clearly intent on locating and capturing Sarah. The time had come for the entire band to relocate to more remote mountain camps, and Sarah would need to make a final choice about her future. She could attempt to return to white society and face almost certain arrest, or she could commit fully to life among the Apache, accepting all the dangers and difficulties that choice would entail. The Apache band's relocation to the mountain strongholds marked a turning point in Sarah's life that she had never anticipated when she first found Ayanna bleeding outside her cabin. The journey through treacherous mountain passes tested every survival skill she had learned, but also revealed the remarkable adaptability that had kept the Apache people free despite decades of military pressure. Hidden caves and secret valleys provided shelter for families, while ancient trails known only to the tribe allowed them to move unseen through terrain that would challenge even experienced mountain men. Sarah's medical skills proved invaluable during the difficult journey. Several elderly tribal members struggled with the high altitude and cold mountain air, while children suffered cuts and scrapes from the rocky terrain. Working with limited supplies and improvised tools, Sarah learned to treat injuries using methods she never could have imagined in her well-equipped cabin. Ayanna worked beside her constantly, their partnership in healing deepening into something that transcended mere professional cooperation. The mountain stronghold, where they finally settled, was a hidden valley accessible only through a narrow canyon that could be easily defended. Fresh water flowed from underground springs, and sheltered areas provided protection from harsh weather. Most importantly, the location was unknown to territorial authorities and could house the entire band indefinitely if necessary. For Sarah, it represented both safety and a final commitment to her new life among the Apache people. As winter approached and the band settled into their mountain sanctuary, Sarah and Ayanna finally found time to explore their relationship away from the immediate pressures of survival and tribal politics. Long conversations by firelight revealed how much they had in common despite their different backgrounds. Both had chosen healing over violence, both had lost family members to frontier conflicts, and both struggled with feeling caught between two worlds. Ayanna between his roles as healer and warrior, Sarah between her past life and her chosen future. Their courtship followed Apache traditions adapted for Sarah's unique circumstances. Ayanna formally presented his intentions to Chief Cochise and sought the blessing of Nasha, who had become Sarah's surrogate grandmother within the tribe. The process involved gift exchanges, demonstrations of Ayanna's ability to provide for a family, and careful negotiations about their future roles within the tribal community. Sarah participated in traditional women's activities, learning to tan hides, prepare traditional foods, and create the intricate beadwork that decorated Apache clothing. The wedding ceremony took place during the winter solstice, combining Apache traditions with adaptations that honored Sarah's background. Nasha conducted the spiritual aspects of the ceremony, calling upon mountain spirits to bless the union between the Apache healer and the white medicine woman who had chosen to become part of their people. Sarah wore traditional Apache bridal clothing that the women of the tribe had created for her, while Ayanna dressed in ceremonial regalia that had belonged to his grandfather. Chief Cochise spoke at the ceremony about the significance of their union, describing it as a bridge between two peoples who had been enemies for too long. He acknowledged that their marriage would not end the conflicts between Apache and white societies, but suggested it might represent hope for a different kind of future. The celebration that followed included traditional dances, storytelling, and a feast that brought together the entire band in recognition of the historic nature of the occasion. As spring arrived in the mountain valley, Sarah and Ayanna established their own lodge and began their life together as a married couple. Their combined medical practice served not only their own band, but also other Apache groups who sent messengers requesting their help with difficult cases. Sarah's reputation as a skilled healer had spread throughout Apache territory, while Ayanna's status was enhanced by his association with someone whose abilities complemented his own so perfectly. The peaceful period was interrupted when Apache scouts brought disturbing news from the lowlands. Territorial authorities had not abandoned their search for Sarah, but had instead escalated their efforts, offering increasingly large rewards for information about her whereabouts. More troubling, they had begun arresting and interrogating any white settlers suspected of sympathizing with Apache causes, creating a climate of fear throughout the territory. Even more concerning were reports that some Apache leaders were considering Sarah's capture and return to authorities as a bargaining chip in negotiations for better treatment of their people. The internal politics of Apache society were complex, with different bands and leaders holding varying opinions about the best strategies for survival. Some viewed Sarah's presence as a liability that endangered all Apache people, while others saw her as a valuable asset whose skills justified the risks. The crisis intensified when a delegation of Apache leaders arrived at the mountain stronghold for a crucial council meeting. Among them was a prominent war chief who had always opposed any cooperation with white society and who viewed Sarah's presence as a betrayal of Apache values. His arguments were persuasive. Every day Sarah remained among them increased the likelihood of military attacks on Apache camps, and her capture was probably inevitable, given the resources being devoted to finding her. Sarah found herself at the center of heated debates about her future. with Ayanna and their supporters arguing passionately for her protection, while others demanded her removal from Apache territory. The discussions revealed deep divisions within Apache society about how to respond to increasing pressure from territorial authorities. Some leaders favored continued resistance and warfare, while others sought accommodation and negotiated settlements. Chief Cochise struggled to find a solution that would preserve tribal unity while protecting someone who had become valuable to his people. Sarah's medical skills were genuinely needed, and her integration into tribal life had been remarkably successful. Yet the practical reality was that her presence made every Apache camp a target for military action, endangering families who had no involvement in her original rescue or her decision to remain among them. The debate reached a climax when scouts reported that a large military expedition was being organized, specifically to locate and capture Sarah, with orders to attack any Apache camps found harboring her. The expedition included not only territorial militia, but also federal troops and experienced Apache scouts who had been hired to guide the soldiers through traditional Apache territory. The approaching force was larger and better equipped than any previous search effort, suggesting that territorial authorities were prepared to go to extraordinary lengths to reclaim their fugitive. Faced with this ultimate threat, Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone at the council meeting. Rather than continue to endanger her adopted people, she announced her intention to surrender herself to authorities, hoping that her capture would end the military pressure on Apache communities. Her proposal shocked Ayanna and their supporters, but Sarah argued that her sacrifice might purchase safety for hundreds of Apache families who had shown her nothing but kindness. Ayanna's reaction to Sarah's proposed surrender was immediate and passionate. He refused to consider allowing his wife to sacrifice herself for political expediency, arguing that her capture would likely result in her execution as a traitor, rather than any meaningful protection for Apache people. The heated argument that followed revealed the depth of their love, but also the impossible nature of their situation. Every choice available to them seemed to lead to tragedy for someone they cared about. Chief Cochise postponed any final decision while scouts monitored the approaching military expedition, and tribal leaders continued their debates. During this tense waiting period, Sarah and Ayanna spent precious time together, knowing that their days in the mountain sanctuary might be numbered. They talked late into the nights about their dreams for the future, their hopes for peace between their peoples, and their determination to find a solution that would not require Sarah's sacrifice. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source when Nasha approached them with a proposal based on ancient Apache traditions and her own spiritual visions. The elderly medicine woman had consulted the spirits and received guidance about a different path forward. According to her vision, Sarah and Ayanna were destined to serve as bridges between two worlds, but not by remaining hidden in mountain strongholds or by surrendering to hostile authorities. Nasha's plan was audacious and dangerous, but offered hope where none had existed before. She proposed that Sarah and Ayanna establish themselves as neutral healers, serving both Apache and white communities while remaining loyal to neither side exclusively. This would require them to leave the safety of Apache territory and create a new kind of life on the frontier, one that challenged the assumptions of both societies about the impossibility of cooperation between races. The concept of medical neutrality was not unknown in frontier society. There were precedents of doctors and healers who served all comers regardless of politics or racial background. However, such arrangements required the tacit acceptance of both communities and extraordinary courage from those willing to take such risks. Sarah and Ayanna would essentially be placing themselves between two warring peoples, vulnerable to attack from either side if their neutrality was questioned. Chief Cochise was intrigued by Nasha's proposal, but worried about the practical difficulties involved. Where could such a neutral healing station be established? How could it be protected from military action or tribal raids? Most importantly, how could they convince both Apache and white leaders to respect the neutrality of such an arrangement? The challenges seemed overwhelming, but the alternative of continued warfare and Sarah's potential capture was equally unacceptable. The solution emerged through careful negotiation and strategic planning over several weeks. A location was identified, an isolated trading post at the junction of two major trails, far enough from military bases and tribal strongholds to be relatively neutral territory. The post had been abandoned after its owner was killed in a bandit attack, but its buildings remained intact and its location was ideal for serving travelers from both communities. More importantly, both Apache and territorial leaders had reasons to support a neutral healing station. The Apache desperately needed access to certain medical supplies and techniques that only white doctors possessed, while territorial authorities were struggling with inadequate medical care for their own people. A neutral facility that served both communities could address practical needs on both sides while providing a potential channel for communication that might eventually lead to more formal peace negotiations. The negotiations required delicate diplomacy and careful guarantees from both sides. Apache leaders agreed to respect the neutrality of the healing station and to protect it from attacks by militant tribal members. In return, territorial authorities promised to recognize the medical facility as neutral ground and to refrain from using it for intelligence gathering or military purposes. Both sides understood that violations of these agreements would result in the immediate collapse of the arrangement. Sarah and Ayanna spent their final weeks in the mountain stronghold preparing for their new role as neutral healers. They gathered medical supplies from both Apache and white sources, established protocols for treating patients from both communities, and developed systems for maintaining their neutrality in the face of inevitable political pressures. Most importantly, they strengthened their own relationship and commitment to each other, knowing that their success would depend on their ability to work together under extremely difficult circumstances. The journey to their new home was emotional for both of them. Sarah was leaving the Apache community that had welcomed her and given her a new identity, while Ayanna was essentially exiling himself from his own people to pursue their shared vision of healing without boundaries. They traveled with a small escort of Apache warriors who helped them establish their facility and provided initial protection while word of their neutral status spread throughout the territory. The abandoned trading post required significant work to convert it into a proper medical facility. Sarah and Ayanna spent days cleaning and organizing the buildings, setting up treatment areas and establishing living quarters for themselves and their patients. They created separate entrances for Apache and white patients to minimize potential conflicts, while ensuring that their treatment protocols remained identical regardless of a patient's background. Their first patients arrived within days of opening, a white prospector suffering from a broken leg and an Apache child with a severe infection. Treating both patients simultaneously tested their commitment to neutrality and demonstrated their skill to both communities. Word of their facility spread quickly through both Apache and white networks, carried by traders, travelers, and tribal messengers who recognized the value of having skilled medical care available in such a remote location. The success of their initial cases established Sarah and Ayanna's reputation as competent healers who honored their promises of neutrality. However, they also faced constant challenges from extremists on both sides who viewed any cooperation between races as betrayal. Threats and intimidation attempts were frequent, requiring them to develop security procedures and communication systems that would alert friendly forces if they faced serious danger. As their first winter approached in the neutral healing station, Sarah and Ayanna had achieved something unprecedented in the territory, a functioning example of peaceful cooperation between Apache and white communities. Their facility had treated dozens of patients from both sides, saved several lives, and demonstrated that racial barriers could be overcome when practical needs demanded cooperation. Yet they both understood that their experiment. The winter months tested Sarah and Ayanna's commitment to their neutral healing mission in ways they had never anticipated. Severe snowstorms isolated their trading post for weeks at a time, forcing them to rely entirely on their own resources while caring for patients who could not be moved to other facilities. A devastating outbreak of influenza struck both Apache and white communities simultaneously, bringing desperate families to their door despite dangerous travel conditions and political tensions. During the height of the epidemic, Sarah and Ayanna found themselves treating patients around the clock, with Apache and white families camping together outside their facility while waiting for treatment. The shared experience of fighting for their loved ones' lives broke down barriers that years of conflict had created. Parents who had viewed each other as mortal enemies found themselves sharing food, caring for each other's children, and working together to help the overwhelmed healers manage the crisis. The epidemic also brought unexpected allies to their cause. Dr. Marcus Webb, A territorial physician who had initially opposed their neutral facility arrived with medical supplies and offered his assistance when he realized the scope of the outbreak. His presence legitimized their work in the eyes of white authorities, who had remained skeptical about Apache medical practices. Similarly, several respected Apache medicine people came to help, bringing traditional remedies that proved effective in treating symptoms that conventional medicine struggled to address. As spring arrived and the epidemic subsided, Sarah and Ayanna discovered that their facility had become something more than a medical station. It had evolved into a genuine meeting ground where members of both communities could interact peacefully. White traders began stopping regularly to exchange goods with Apache visitors, while tribal representatives used the facility as a neutral location for discussions with territorial officials about practical matters like water rights and grazing boundaries. The success of their mission attracted attention from unexpected quarters when a government peace commissioner arrived to investigate reports of successful cooperation between hostile communities. Commissioner James Patterson had been appointed by federal authorities to explore alternatives to the costly military campaigns that had produced little besides casualties and resentment on both sides. He spent several days observing operations at the healing station and interviewing patients from both communities. Patterson's report to Washington described Sarah and Ayanna's facility as a unique example of successful racial cooperation that offered lessons for broader peace efforts. He recommended federal support for expanding their neutral healing mission and proposed using their facility as a model for other locations throughout the territory. The commissioner's endorsement provided official protection for their work and opened possibilities for securing regular supplies and funding. However, success also brought new challenges and responsibilities that strained their personal relationship. The constant demands of treating patients, managing political pressures, and mediating between communities left little time for Sarah and Ayanna to nurture their marriage. They found themselves working side by side for days without meaningful personal conversation. Their relationship reduced to professional coordination and shared exhaustion. The strain intensified when Sarah discovered she was pregnant with their first child. The pregnancy was both a blessing and a complication. It represented the ultimate symbol of union between their two peoples, but it also raised difficult questions about their child's future in a world still divided by racial hatred. Would their child be accepted by either community, or would he or she face rejection from both sides as a living reminder of forbidden love? Ayanna's reaction to the pregnancy revealed depths of feeling he had struggled to express during their busy months of establishing the healing station. His joy was mixed with fierce protectiveness and determination to create a world where their child could grow up safely, regardless of his mixed heritage. They spent long evenings discussing their hopes and fears for their family's future, strengthening their emotional bond even as external pressures continued to mount. The arrival of their son in late summer created an unprecedented situation in territorial society. The child, whom they named Thomas Ayanna, in honor of Sarah's first husband and Ayanna's heritage, was the first documented offspring of an Apache white marriage in the territory's history. His birth attracted visitors from both communities, many coming simply to see this living symbol of racial harmony that had previously existed only in their imagination. Chief Cochise himself traveled to the healing station to meet his newest tribal member, conducting traditional Apache ceremonies to welcome the child into the community. Similarly, several white families who had been helped by Sarah and Ayanna's medical care came to offer congratulations and gifts. The baby's reception by both communities suggested that attitudes were slowly changing, at least among those who had direct experience with the benefits of cooperation. As their son grew, and their healing mission expanded, Sarah and Ayanna began to see tangible evidence that their sacrifice and dedication were producing lasting changes in territorial society. Young people from both communities were beginning to question the inherited hatreds that had shaped their parents' lives. Intermarriage remained rare and controversial, but other forms of cooperation, trade relationships, shared grazing agreements, and joint responses to natural disasters were becoming more common. The transformation was gradual and incomplete, with periodic setbacks when extremists on either side attempted to disrupt the fragile peace. But by their son's second birthday, Sarah and Ayanna could point to dozens of families from both communities who had benefited from their neutral healing. Mission and hundreds more who had been touched by their example of successful interracial cooperation, their personal journey from that desperate morning. When Sarah found Ayanna bleeding outside, her cabin had led them through trials neither could have imagined. They had lost their original identities and communities but had gained something precious in return. A love that transcended racial boundaries and a mission that offered hope for peace in a divided land. Their son would grow up in a world still marked by conflict and prejudice, but he would also inherit their legacy of healing and their proof that love could indeed conquer the artificial barriers that divided human hearts. Standing together outside their healing station on a clear desert evening, watching their son take his first steps while Apache and white children played together nearby, Sarah and Ayanna knew they had found their destiny. They had become living bridges between two worlds, their love and commitment creating possibilities that neither community could have achieved alone. The future remained uncertain, but they faced it together with the quiet confidence of those who had already overcome the impossible.